By the time the cake hit the bottom of the steel bin, Marguerite Okonkwo had already lost the only thing she had left, which was her belief that 19 years of quiet work counted for something in a room full of people who had never once bothered to learn her name. The cake had taken her 19 hours. The fall took 3 seconds. And the woman who threw it away, the pastry director who had signed her own name to Marguerite's recipes for 4 years, did not even look at her when she said the 8 words that would follow Marguerite the rest of her life. Nobody remembers who baked it, only who serves it. That was the wound. Cold, casual, precise. And by the way, wherever in the world you're watching from right now, let me know in the comments. I love seeing how far these stories reach. Okay, where were we? Marguerite standing in the service corridor of the Meridian Grand, flour still white in the creases of her forearms, watching a 3-tier hazelnut praline gâteau she had built by hand disappear beneath coffee grounds and lobster shells, and understanding for the first time with total clarity that in this city, the person who makes the beautiful thing is invisible, and the person who carries it to the table is a star. She did not cry. She wiped her hands on her apron, and she began, very quietly, to plan the way an underestimated person plans, which is to say she began to pay attention. To understand what happened over the 11 days that followed, you have to understand who Marguerite was before that bin and who she had allowed herself to become. She was 39 years old. She stood 5'3" and carried her weight the way tall women wish they could carry theirs, with a slow certainty that made kitchens feel calmer when she entered them. For 19 years, she had baked in the city of Harburg, a river city of glass towers and old brick. And for the last 4 of those years, she had baked at the Meridian Grand Hotel under a pastry director named Celeste Vane. Celeste was 44, thin, in the way that is a full-time occupation, and she possessed one genuine talent, which was the talent of standing near excellence until people assumed she had produced it. Marguerite had known this for 4 years. She had said nothing because she needed the job, because her sister Ada was raising 2 children alone across the river, and because Marguerite had built her whole life around a single private conviction, a sentence her grandmother used to say while folding butter into dough in a kitchen that smelled of cardamom. The work remembers who did it, even when the world forgets. She repeated it to herself, now in the corridor as a supervisor named Roland hurried past and did not slow. The work remembers who did it. She was not sure she believed it anymore. What she believed standing there was that she had spent 4 years being folded quietly into someone else's rise, and that the hazelnut gâteau in the bin had been meant for the private dining room on the 40th floor, where the hotel's owners were hosting a man the entire staff had been warned about in whispers all week. A man from a family that did not appear on any board, and yet somehow owned 3 of the buildings, visible from that 40th floor window. A man whose name the concierge would only say once, softly, as though saying it twice might summon something. Mr. Du Yun Han. Here is what Marguerite did not know. Standing there, the cake had not been thrown away by accident. Celeste had ordered it destroyed because she had already made her own cake. A glossy, architecturally rigid, mirror-glazed construction, and she intended to serve it under her own name to the most powerful private client the Meridian Grand had ever hosted. What Celeste had not counted on, what nobody in that building had counted on, was that Du Yunhan had eaten a slice of Marguerite's hazelnut praline exactly once before, 11 months earlier, at a wedding across the river, and that a man who has buried as many people as Du Yunhan does not forget a taste that once made him feel, for 90 seconds, like a boy in his mother's kitchen again. But that reckoning was still hours away. First, there was the rest of the shift. Marguerite finished it. She glazed 40 petit fours. She plated a dessert course for a retirement dinner. She taught the new apprentice, a nervous 19-year-old named Theo, how to temper chocolate without seizing it. And she did all of this with the mirror-glass calm of a woman who has decided something, but has not yet told anyone, least of all herself. At 11 that night, she took the river ferry home, 6 stops, 22 minutes across black water, and she sat by the window and watched the lit towers slide by, and she made a list in her head. Not a list of revenges, a list of facts. Fact 1. Celeste had signed her name to 4 of Marguerite's original recipes, including the praline, in the hotel's published dessert portfolio. Fact 2. Marguerite had, out of habit, older than her resentment, kept every original handwritten formulation dated in a green notebook her grandmother had given her. Fact 3. She had photographs time-stamped of herself building each of those desserts over 4 years, because she had wanted someday to show her niece and nephew what their aunt made with her hands. Fact 4. And this was the one that made her sit very still on the ferry. The private dinner on the 40th floor was not over. It would resume tomorrow, a 3-day affair, and the cake had only been the first course of the first night. The work remembers who did it. She got home to her small apartment above a shuttered laundromat, and she did not sleep. Instead, she took out the green notebook, and she read her grandmother's handwriting interleaved with her own. 2 generations of measurements in grams, and she understood that she had a choice. She could go to Celeste's superiors and be, at best, a disgruntled baker making accusations against a director everyone loved to photograph, or she could do the thing that frightened her, which was nothing dramatic at all. She could simply keep paying attention and let the powerful people in that building do to each other what powerful people always do when someone quietly holds a light. The next morning, she arrived at 4:30, before the sun, before Celeste, before anyone. The kitchen at that hour belonged to her, the way it always had, all stainless steel and blue dawn coming through the high windows. And it was in that first hour that the first strange thing happened. Roland, the supervisor, came down, and he did not hurry past her. He stopped. He looked for a long moment like a man deciding whether to say something, and then he said it. Mr. Han asked a question last night, after the dessert. Marguerite kept folding her dough. What question? Roland lowered his voice, though there was no one to hear. He asked who made the first cake, the one that never came out. Celeste told him it was a mistake in the kitchen, that the correct dessert was hers. He didn't say anything, but he asked twice. And then Roland, who in 4 years had never once treated Marguerite as anything but furniture, said the second thing. He asks twice about very few things, Marguerite. My cousin worked for his family when Mr. Hurd. Han asks twice. Someone has already made a mistake. They just don't know it yet. She thanked him, and she went back to her dough, but her hands had changed their rhythm, because she understood now that a machine larger than her resentment had begun very slowly to turn. Let me tell you now how Dionhan came to eat that first cake, because the trail of what followed was laid, though no one intended it. 11 months before the bin, Dionhan was 51 years old. He had come to Harburg from a coastal city where his family had, over 3 generations, built an organization that owned harbors and moved money and settled disputes in rooms without windows. He was not a loud man. Loud men in his world did not reach 51. He wore gray, he spoke softly, he listened more than he spoke, and he had learned from a childhood of poverty so complete that he had once shared a single boiled egg among 4 children, that the most dangerous person in any room is the one everyone has decided not to see. 11 months earlier, he had attended a wedding across the river as a favor to an old associate, and among the endless catered courses there had been one dessert, a hazelnut praline gâteau, that had stopped him mid-sentence. He had asked the associate who made it. The associate did not know. Du Yunhan had filed the taste away, the way he filed everything, in a memory that forgot nothing and forgave less. So when he came to the Meridian Grand and the dessert course arrived, and it was not that cake, but a cold, perfect, flavorless thing under a mirror of glaze. And when the director who presented it did so with a rehearsed little speech about her own artistic vision, Duyan Han did what he always did. He said nothing. He smiled the smile that had emptied rooms. And he began, very quietly, to pay attention. Two people in that building had begun paying attention on the same night, and neither knew about the other, and that is how the machine turns the second day of the private dinner arrived. Celeste swept into the kitchen at 7, radiant, already dressed for the 40th floor, and she gave her orders the way she always did, as though they were gifts. She wanted a citrus soufflé for that evening, 12 covers, and she wanted it under her name, and she told Marguerite to make it and told her nothing else. And then she paused at the door and delivered a second small cruelty, because cruelty in Celeste was a nervous habit, a way of reassuring herself. "And Marguerite," she said, glancing at Marguerite's apron, straining slightly at its knot, "we do watch our portions up on 40. Keep the plating light. These are people with discipline." Then she was gone in a cloud of expensive scent, and Theo the apprentice looked at the floor, and Marguerite made the soufflé. She made the best citrus soufflé of her life. She made it the way her grandmother had taught her, with blood orange and a whisper of cardamom, and when it went up to the 40th floor at 9 that evening under Celeste Vane's name, Duyan Han took one bite and set down his spoon and looked at the space where a server had just been. He recognized the cardamom. Nobody in Harburg put cardamom in a citrus soufflé. Nobody except a baker who had learned it in a kitchen, a world away from a grandmother who had learned it somewhere else. Duyan Han's own mother had used cardamom in everything because it was cheap where they came from, and it made poverty smell like celebration. He set down his spoon, and he turned to the man beside him, his oldest lieutenant, a 58-year-old named Songwoo Park, who had been at Duyan Han's side for 26 years, and he said, quietly in their own language, "The person who threw away the first cake made this one." Songwoo Park nodded and made a note, and something flickered behind his eyes that Duyan Han did not see, because even the most attentive men have one blind spot. And Duyan Han's blind spot was the man who had been loyal so long that loyalty had stopped being examined. Remember Songwoo Park. The trail is being laid now, thread by thread, and he is holding the other end of it. That night, Marguerite took the ferry home again, and this time when she opened her door, there was a small white envelope pushed beneath it. No stamp, no name. Inside, a single sheet of heavy paper, and on it, in careful English, 4 words. "Who taught you cardamom?" That was all. She stood in her doorway for a long time. She did not know who had left it. She did not know that on the 40th floor a man had recognized his mother in her cooking. She knew only that someone finally was asking about the work itself, and the strangeness of it kept her awake a second night, and in the small hours she wrote a reply she did not know how she would deliver. "My grandmother, Naomi, how can..." She said, "The work remembers who did it, even when the world forgets." She folded it and put it in her apron pocket and carried it to work. And that is where the third day began, and the third day is where everything Marguerite thought she understood came apart and reassembled itself into a shape she could not have imagined. Because on the third day, Duyan Han came down to the kitchen. It was 10 in the morning, the dead hour between breakfast and lunch service, and Marguerite was alone at the marble slab laminating dough when the service door opened without the usual clatter, and a man in a gray suit stood in it. She knew who he was before anyone told her. There is a quality to genuine power, which is that it does not announce itself. It simply changes the pressure in a room. Behind him, one step back and to the left, stood the older man, Songwoo Park, and behind them both stood Roland the supervisor, white as his own uniform. Duyan Han crossed the kitchen slowly. He stopped at the marble slab. He looked at the dough, at the exact even folds of it, and then he looked at Marguerite, and he asked her the question that the entire hotel had spent 3 days pretending had no answer. Who made the hazelnut cake? And Marguerite, who had spent 19 years being invisible, who had every reason in the world to be careful, looked at this man whom everyone feared, and answered with the plain truth, because she had run out of any other kind. "I did." For a moment, nothing happened. Then Duyun Han did something no one in that kitchen had ever seen a client do. He inclined his head, a small bow, the kind you give an equal, and he said, "I ate your cake at a wedding across the river 11 months ago. I have thought about it perhaps 40 times since. Yesterday I ate your soufflé, and I tasted my mother's kitchen." He paused. "The woman who presented both told me they were hers." He let the sentence sit. Marguerite said nothing. She had learned that silence, correctly used, is the loudest thing an underestimated person owns. Duyun Han studied her, and what he saw was not anger, which he expected, but stillness, which he respected. "You are not going to defend yourself," he observed. "No," Marguerite said. "The work defends itself. Or it doesn't." And Duyun Han, who had spent his life among men who did nothing but defend themselves, felt something he had not felt in years, which was interest. He asked to see the notebook. She did not ask how he knew there was a notebook. She simply brought it from her locker, the green cloth cover worn soft, and she opened it on the marble and showed him her grandmother's handwriting beside her own. The dated formulas, 4 years of them, the praline and the soufflé, and every dessert Celeste Vane had presented as her own genius on the 40th floor. Yuan Han turned the pages the way a man turns the pages of something sacred. Sangwoo Park stood one step back, and he watched the notebook, and if Marguerite had been looking at him instead of Duyun Han, she might have seen his face change, might have seen him understand something before anyone else in the room understood it, because Sangwoo Park had a very particular reason to be afraid of anyone who documented things carefully and kept the proof. But she was not looking at him. Nobody ever looked at Sangwoo Park. That was his power, too. Duyun Han closed the notebook. "I do not involve myself in kitchens," he said, "but I dislike theft, not because it is illegal, because it is lazy." He turned to leave, and then he stopped, and he asked one more thing, the thing that would open the door. He did not yet know he was opening. "Who published these under her name?" "The hotel or the woman," Marguerite answered. "The hotel published the portfolio. Celeste signs the recipes, but the portfolio goes to the hotel's investors as proof of the pastry program's value." And that single sentence, offered plainly, was the loose thread, because Duyun Han owned, through 4 intermediary companies, a 19% stake in the group that owned the Meridian Grand, and he had been quietly unhappy with that group, for reasons that had nothing to do with cake, and a man like Duyun Han does not need a large door. He needs a true one. That evening the machine turned faster. Duyun Han did not eat on the 40th floor. Instead, he sat in his suite with Sangwoo Park and reviewed the hotel group's financial disclosures, the ones sent to investors, the ones that leaned heavily on the celebrated pastry program as evidence of the property's premium value. And it was here, in the numbers, that Duyun Han's attention, that famous attention, snagged on something, a pattern of payments. Supplier invoices for the pastry department, 26 months of them, running roughly 40% higher than the department could possibly consume, routed through a vendor Duyun Han did not recognize, approved by a signature he did recognize, because he had seen it 10,000 times over 26 years. Sangwoo Park's signature, not Celeste's. Sangwoo Park had been placed 2 years earlier on the hotel group's oversight committee as Duyun Han's representative. And he had been using the celebrated pastry program, the one everyone was watching as the noisy front behind which he skimmed. Celeste's theft of Marguerite's recipes had made the pastry program famous, and its fame had made it the perfect place to hide money, and the more attention it drew, the less anyone examined the invoices behind it. Duyun Han sat very still, and he understood that a woman he had met that morning had, entirely without knowing it, kept the only honest set of records in a building full of lies. Her dated notebook, her time-stamped photographs, her careful, ignored, invisible documentation of exactly what was made and when, which could be laid against the inflated supply invoices to show precisely how much had been stolen. The overlooked person had been keeping the light on the whole time, and the man beside him, the man he had trusted for 26 years, had been counting on the fact that no one ever looks at the person holding the light. He did not say any of this to Sang-woo Park. He said, only, I am tired tonight. We will talk business tomorrow. And Sang-woo Park, who had spent 26 years reading Do-yeon-han's tiredness, heard something under it that he did not like, and he went to his own room, and he too did not sleep, and he began, very quietly, to plan. Because the third fact about a machine that turns is that once two people are paying attention, it is only a matter of time before a third begins. Marguerite knew none of this. She took the ferry home a third night, and she still had the folded reply in her apron pocket, the one about her grandmother Naomi, and she still did not know to whom she owed it. What she knew was that the fearful man in gray had held her notebook like scripture, and that for the first time in 4 years she had said "I did" out loud, and the words had not gotten her fired. She slept that night, finally, deeply. And she dreamed of her grandmother's kitchen and the smell of cardamom, and in the dream Naomi said, as she always said, the work remembers who did it, and Marguerite answered in the dream, someone else remembers too now, and Naomi only smiled and folded the butter into the dough. The fourth day broke gray and wet, rain sheeting off the river, and it was the day Marguerite was called to the 40th floor for the first time in her life. The summons came at 8 in the morning, delivered by Roland, who could barely speak. Mr. Han requested her presence. Not Celeste's. Hers. Marguerite climbed into the private elevator with her flour-dusted apron still on because no one had told her to change, and she would not pretend to be someone she wasn't. And the doors opened onto a room she had spent 4 years feeding without ever seeing, a room of pale wood and glass with the whole rain-blurred city spread beneath it. Do-yeon-han stood at the window. Sang-woo Park sat at the long table, and on the table lay Marguerite's green notebook, which she had not given anyone, which meant someone had taken it from her locker, and beside the notebook lay a stack of printed pages she did not recognize, columns of numbers. Do-yeon-han turned. I apologize, he said, for the notebook. It was removed without your permission last night. That was wrong, and I have already spoken to the person who did it. His eyes moved briefly to Sang-woo Park, and something passed between the two men that Marguerite felt but could not name. I needed to be certain of something, Do-yeon-han continued, and now I am. Please, sit. She sat. And Do-yeon-han did something remarkable. He asked her questions, and he listened to the answers, and he did not decide in advance what mattered. He asked her how much butter the pastry department actually used in a month. He asked her how much flour, how much of the specialty hazelnut paste, how many kilos of chocolate. And Marguerite, who had ordered these supplies for 4 years, who knew them the way she knew her own hands, told him precise numbers, and Sang-woo Park sat very still while she did, because every honest number she spoke was a nail. The invoices. Do-yeon-han said at last, sliding the printed pages toward her. Say the department used nearly twice what you have just described. For over 2 years, Marguerite looked at the numbers. Her mind, which had spent 19 years being told it was ornamental, did the arithmetic without being asked. This is impossible, she said. We never bought this much. I know because I baked all of it. And she looked up, and for the first time she looked at Sang-woo Park. Really looked, and she saw a man who had gone the color of ash, and she understood all at once why the man in gray had brought a humble baker to the 40th floor. She was not there as a victim, she was there as a witness. Mr. Park approved these invoices. Do-yeon-han said quietly, Mr. Park has been my hand in this building. Mr. Park has been my hand for 26 years. He said it slowly, letting each repetition land. The way Marguerite herself used silence, And she realized the two of them were more alike than either would have guessed. Two people who had learned that the world reveals itself to those patient enough to wait. Sang-woo Park finally spoke, and his voice was smooth and reasonable, and Marguerite heard in it the exact texture of Celeste's cruelty dressed up as concern. "Dooyeon," he said, "you are letting a kitchen woman's grudge cloud a serious matter. The invoices are complex. She sees butter and flour. She does not see logistics, storage, waste, the true cost of a premium program. She is not qualified to endue you." Yoon Han raised one finger, a small gesture, and Sang-woo Park stopped talking, because in 26 years he had learned what that finger meant. "She baked the cake," Yoon Han said, "that I remembered for 11 months. She put my mother's cardamom in a souffle without knowing my mother existed. She kept honest records for 4 years in a building where no one asked her to. You are telling me she is not qualified to count butter." He let the rain fill the silence. "Sang-woo, I have known you longer than I have known almost anyone alive, so I'm going to give you the courtesy I would give no one else. I am going to ask you once, and I am going to watch your face, and you know that I read faces, the way she reads dough." He leaned forward. "Did you steal from me?" There is a pause that comes before a lie, when the liar realizes the truth is already known. And Sang-woo Park's pause was exactly that length. And in that pause, Sang-woo Park made his choice, and it was not the choice Yoon Han expected, and it was not the choice a cornered man in a story usually makes. He did not confess, and he did not run. He smiled, a small, controlled smile, and he said, "You are asking the wrong question, old friend. The question is not whether I took. The question is how many people in this building answer to me now, and not to you." And Marguerite, sitting between two men whose war she had accidentally started, felt the temperature of the room drop, and understood that she had wandered into something far older and far larger than a stolen recipe. Because Sang-woo Park had not spent 26 years being loyal. He had spent 26 years being patient, and the pastry skim, the inflated invoices, that was never the crime, that was the tuition. Over 2 years, he had used the money not to enrich himself, but to buy something far more valuable in Yoon Han's world, which was loyalty, the quiet purchase of lieutenants and drivers and doormen and account signatories throughout Yoon Han's Harburg operation, one small favor at a time, until Sang-woo Park could stand in a room on the 40th floor of a hotel and tell the most feared man in the city calmly, in the rain, that the ground beneath him was no longer his own. He had chosen the loudest, most watched program in the building, the celebrated pastry line, precisely because Yoon Han, like everyone else, would keep his eyes on the star and never on the invoices behind her. Celeste's vanity had been Sang-woo Park's camouflage, and the only person who had ever kept a true count of anything was the woman everyone had decided not to see. Yoon Han did not move. His face did not change. But Marguerite, who read faces the way she read dough, saw the exact moment he calculated how much time he had, and she understood it was very little. Sang-woo Park stood, buttoned his jacket, and walked to the elevator unhurried, because a man does not hurry when he believes the room already belongs to him. "I will be downstairs," he said. "By noon, the men you think are yours will have been reminded who has been paying them the extra. You built an empire, Dooyeon, but you stopped counting it. I never stopped counting." The elevator doors closed on him, and the room was very quiet, and the rain came down the glass in long gray ropes. And then Yoon Han, alone with a baker in a flour-dusted apron, turned to her and did the thing that told her everything about why he had survived to 51 when louder men had not. He did not panic. He asked a question. "Marguerite," he said, using her name for the first time, "you count things. For years you have counted things no one asked you to count." He gestured at the notebook, the invoices, the whole architecture of quiet documentation that had brought them here. "I have spent 26 years trusting a man to count for me. It seems I trusted the wrong counter." He almost smiled. I need to know how many hours I have. Help me count. It was the strangest partnership Harburg would never hear about. A mafia boss and a plus-size baker in a glass room above a rain-drowned city, and it was Marguerite of all people who saw the arithmetic first, because arithmetic was the language of her whole invisible life. He said by noon, she said, "It's 8:40. He needs to reach her people in person or by someone they trust, one at a time, because a man buying loyalty can't do it by mass message. It leaves a record, and he's careful. He's been careful for 2 years." She looked at Du Yunhan. "How many key people are there? The ones whose word moves the others." Du Yunhan considered. "Perhaps 9 in this city, 9 men whose loyalty decides the rest." "And you have to reach those 9 before he does," Marguerite said, "and you have to give them a reason to stay that's stronger than money, because he's had 2 years of money and you've had, what, their fear? Fear is cheaper than money. It doesn't last." And Du Yunhan looked at her, this woman who had never held power in her life, explaining power to him better than his oldest friend ever had. And he understood that Sang-woo Park had made one final miscalculation, which was that in choosing to hide behind the invisible woman. He had made the invisible woman the one person in the building who understood exactly how invisibility worked. What followed happened across 2 hours and 11 phone calls, and Marguerite would remember it the rest of her life as the strangest morning she ever spent. Du Yunhan sat at the long table and began to call his 9, one by one, and Marguerite sat across from him with a legal pad taken from a drawer, and she did what she had done for 19 years. She counted and she tracked and she paid attention. She noted who answered warmly and who answered slowly, which told them who Sang-woo Park had already reached. And here the story turned on the very thing that had begun it, because when Du Yunhan reached the 4th man, a driver named Jin who ran the harbor logistics, Jin was hesitant, and Marguerite, listening, understood why. Sang-woo Park had promised Jin something specific, a percentage, a fair share, treatment as a partner rather than a servant. And Du Yunhan's instinct was to offer more money, and Marguerite touched his arm, the first time she had touched him, and she shook her head, and she wrote on the legal pad 4 words and turned it toward him. "Offer him what's true." So Du Yunhan, instead of outbidding, did something he had never done in 26 years. He told Jin the truth. He said, "Sang-woo has offered you a partnership. I cannot offer you more money than a thief who has been stealing from me for 2 years. But I can offer you this. I have treated you as a servant for 11 years, and that was wrong, and it is the reason you are hesitating now. If you stay, you will not be a servant. You will be counted. Everyone will be counted." I have just been reminded, by a woman who bakes cakes, what happens to a man who stops counting the people who hold him up. There was a long silence on the line, and then Jin said quietly, "I have waited 11 years for you to say that," and he stayed. And so did the 5th and the 6th, because word moves fast among men who talk to each other, and the word that moved was not fear, and it was not money. It was that Du Yunhan had changed, that the old man had finally learned to see, and in that world, as in every world, the rarest thing you can offer someone is the sense that they are truly seen. By 11:40, Du Yunhan had reached 8 of the 9, and 7 had held, and one of them, an accountant named Mrs. Portme, gave them the thing that turned the whole morning, because she was the one who moved the actual money, and she told Du Yunhan that Sang-woo Park had asked her that very morning to transfer the operational accounts to a new signatory structure by noon, and she had stalled him because I do not trust a man who is suddenly in a hurry after 2 years of patience. She had stalled him. The invisible accountant, the woman nobody watched, had stalled the whole coup by 90 minutes out of pure instinct, the same instinct that had made Marguerite keep her notebook. Du Yunhan closed his eyes for a moment, and Marguerite saw him understand fully that his empire had been held up all along not by the men he trusted, but by the people he had never bothered to see, and that his salvation was arriving through exactly the doors he had ignored his whole life. The ninth man was Song-woo Park himself, and by the time noon came, the coup that was meant to happen was a coup with no one left to lead. Sang-woo Park went downstairs to reclaim an empire and found that the empire had, in 2 hours, remembered who its true owner was, not because it feared him more, but because for the first time it had been asked to stay rather than commanded. He did not fight. Men in his world do not fight when the arithmetic is against them. He simply walked out of the Meridian Grand into the rain and vanished, and Du Yun-han did not send anyone after him, and Marguerite would later ask him why, and he would say, because he taught me something worth more than revenge. He taught me I had stopped counting. A man who teaches you that, you let him go. He will spend the rest of his life knowing he was one accountant's 90 minutes away from winning, and that is a worse sentence than anything I could arrange. But the morning was not over, and the last piece of it belonged, as it should have, to the cake, because at 12:30, with the crisis past and the rain finally thinning over the river, Du Yun-han did not leave. He sent Roland to find Celeste Vane and bring her to the 40th floor, and when Celeste arrived, radiant and confused, dressed for a triumph she still believed was hers, she found her employer of 4 years sitting beside the most powerful client the hotel had ever hosted, with a green notebook and a stack of invoices between them, and she began, "Die immediately, to perform." "Mr. Han," she said, "I hope Marguerite hasn't been troubling you. She's a wonderful worker, but she does get, ideas about," and Du Yun-han raised the single finger. And Celeste, who had never learned to read a room because she had never bothered to look at anyone in it, kept talking, and that was her whole undoing in a single gesture. The woman who did not see, standing beside 2 people who had just been saved by seeing. Di Yun-han let her finish. Then he said mildly, "Mrs. Vane, 3 nights ago you threw away a hazelnut praline cake and told me it was a mistake. 2 nights ago you served me a citrus souffle and told me it was your creation. Both were made by this woman." He nodded at Marguerite. "I have eaten in the finest rooms in 9 countries. I have never told anyone that a dessert made me remember my mother. I told her." He closed the green notebook. "You did not steal recipes from a baker. You stole a language from a woman who was speaking it to her dead grandmother. And you did it because you decided, the way everyone in this building decided, that the person who makes the beautiful thing does not matter. Only the person who serves it." He stood. "You said, I am told, that nobody remembers who baked it, only who serves it. I want you to know that I remember exactly who baked it, and I am the only person at that table whose memory you should have feared." Celeste Vane was gone from the Meridian Grand by the end of the week, and the published portfolio was corrected, every recipe restored to Marguerite Okonkwo's name. But that is not the part of the story that matters. And Marguerite knew it wasn't, because a corrected credit is only the world catching up to a truth the work always held. What mattered came 3 days later, when the hotel group, now under Du Yun-han's considerably closer and more honest attention, offered Marguerite the position of pastry director, Celeste's old job, the 40th floor, the title, the name at the top of the portfolio. And Marguerite said no. She said it in the same glass room, to Du Yun-han, who had asked to be present, and she said it plainly, the way she said everything now. "I don't want her job," she said. "I don't want to be the star who gets remembered instead of the baker. That's the same trade, just with me on top of it. I don't want to stand at the table. I want to build a kitchen where the person who makes the thing is the person who gets to say, 'I made it.'" Du Yun-han looked at her for a long moment, and then he asked the question that would decide the rest of both their lives. "And what would you need to build a kitchen like that?" Marguerite told him. "Not a promotion. A bakery. Her own across the river, near her sister Ada and the 2 children, a place with her grandmother Naomi's name over the door, where she would train the Theos of the world to sign their own work, where nobody's cake would ever go in the bin to make room for someone else's name. Duyunhan did not give it to her. This is the part people never believe, but it is the truest part. He did not simply write a check, because he had learned that rainy morning exactly how little a check is worth compared to being seen, and he would not insult her by handing her the thing she had earned as though it were charity. Instead, he made her an offer that was in its way the most respectful thing anyone had ever done for her. He offered to lend her the money at fair terms she could actually meet, and he offered one condition. For 1 year, he said, you will keep your notebook the way you always have. Every cost, every hour, every honest number. And at the end of the year, you will show me the books. Not because I doubt you, but because I have just learned what happens to men who stop looking at the people who hold them up. If the books are honest, and I know they will be, the loan converts and the bakery is entirely yours. And I never enter your kitchen again unless you invite me for cake. He extended his hand. I am not giving you anything. I am counting on you. There is a difference, and I only learned it this week from you. Marguerite Okonkwo shook the hand of the most feared man in harbor, and 11 months later, almost exactly 1 year after a stranger had eaten her cake at a wedding and never forgotten it, she opened a small bakery across the river with her grandmother's name over the door. And on the opening morning, a man in a gray suit came in out of the early cold and sat at the counter and ordered a slice of hazelnut praline and paid for it like any other customer and ate it slowly and said nothing, because between people who truly see each other, silence is the highest compliment there is. And when he left a note under his plate, the same heavy paper as the note she had once found under her door, and on it were 4 words, and she understood at last who had asked the first question, all those months ago in the dark. The work remembers you. She kept it in the green notebook on the page between her grandmother's handwriting and her own, where it belonged, and every morning before the sun she would open that notebook and read it and fold the butter into the dough and remember that the world had spent 19 years deciding she did not matter and had been, all along, exactly 1 attentive stranger and 1 honest count away from learning how wrong it was. Nobody remembers who baked it, only who serves it, the woman had said, and thrown her life's work in the trash. But the work remembers who did it, even when the world forgets. And sometimes, if you keep the count honest long enough, the world remembers too.